I just want to throw back to the Premier League. So if because of the disjointed season, because everything's a bit all over the show, if you're like a football fan or you're a casual sports fan in Aotearoa and you just need a bit of insight and a bit of knowledge on the style of play at the Premier League, because style of play is going to be a little theme throughout this podcast. So if you're just a Kiwi sports fan, casual vibes, or even a football fan, you just haven't been paying too much attention to the Premier League, and you want to be able to spin some yarns with your mates, you want to be able to show that you know your football and just, as Kiwi blokes do and Kiwi women like to do, chat about football and sports. How would you describe the style of play and what worked in the Premier League and what didn't work? Just some key points, talking points, key ideas for people to take forth and put their own juice, sprinkle their own little pepper on top of that.
Yeah, righto. It's sort of, it's different from club to club. You get, for example, a team like Burnley with Chris Wood, who would like to play that very sort of more traditional English style of, a lot of physicality, real organized defense, not crazy amounts of passing through the midfield, but a lot of hard work in the midfield and then crosses into the box and just being like a bit of a battering ram kind of team. That's Burnley for you, and they're very good at it too. Starting from the top, you're probably looking at, obviously, we talked about Liverpool a week ago or so, and they're going to be a very influential team over the next sort of 5 years as they become like the team that other teams are trying to copy, and they're quite high energy, a lot of they like to attack at pace, they got speed and skill up front, 3 wide attackers, that kind of thing, sort of rotating a little in the midfield. I don't know that I think their midfield is, I don't want to say this about the current champs, but I think their midfield is the weakest aspect of their unit, but obviously it functions within a whole, they're just there to facilitate those attackers, get the ball to Sadio Mane with a bit of room, get the ball to Mo Salah with a bit of room, let them attack at pace. That's the job, flow forward and support, and they're excellent at it. They've also got 2 fantastic fullbacks as well who get up and swing excellent crosses into the box and just join in with those attacks and stuff, which gives them another element. They're one of those teams as well who has a goalkeeper who's quite good with his feet. No one's as good with his feet though as as old Ederson for Manchester City, who just every week there's a miracle pass. There's one he played, was it yesterday morning? I think they played Southampton, and he just it wasn't even a long ball over the top. He threaded threw about 4 defenders over about 50 meters. Just went from goalkeeper to one of their wingers, I think it was, threading a ball along the ground. It was just incredible. City are like that. City, obviously, Pep Guardiola team. They've got a very Pep Guardiola style of play. It involves a lot of passing, a lot of movement, dominating possession. There's this fascinating stuff with I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but you'll be able to find it looking it up. Pep Guardiola splits his training paddocks into different areas, so he's just got a whole bunch of extra lines and just vertical and horizontal lines going across, making it almost a little bit like a kind of warped acid trip chessboard kind of thing. And his idea is that you should never have more than 2 players in any vertical or horizontal row at a time. So this is how he spreads his team out. And you can see it when you watch them. You can see the way if a player moves into one area, another player moves out of that area to a different, just to make sure everything's spread out and there's always a couple of passing options. And they'll just crush you like that by passing the ball around so perfectly. Then other teams are a little bit different. Chelsea and Manchester United both have a similar thing going on where they're a lot of young players trying to play with a lot of energy, trying to sort of facilitate those young guys on attack. Guys like Rashford, Pulisic, and United have found a bit of another level recently, getting Pogba back from injury and Bruno Fernandes coming in. So they got a bit of some real attack and punch from the midfield, something maybe Chelsea are a little lacking on, but that's going to be probably the most fascinating run-in from here on is the the battle for like third, fourth, and fifth, and it might not matter because Man City's Champions League thing might not come through, so fifth place might be Champions League anyway. But chuck Leicester City into the mix, who are currently third but seem to be falling off a bit, and there you go. You got a bit of an interesting one there. I don't know how I would sort of categorize the rest of the thing. I think a lot of teams like Sheffield United are a very innovative team tactically, which is why you see like they're a team that don't have a lot of big name players, but everything's very well organized. Whereas Arsenal maybe perhaps going through a bit of a rebuilding phase at the moment, don't have a great identity to what they do. So and Tottenham are run head first from Pochettino to Mourinho, so there's a bit of a clash of styles going on there as well. So a lot of it in football is reflective of your manager, and a lot of it is dependent on the kind of players that you have. And so I don't know that there's like a distinctive Premier League style, but there are sort of some, like the Premier League is a very fast-paced league. It tends to be like you've got a pretty good standard because there's so much money in that league. So even the lower clubs are outbidding like the teams battling relegation in the Premier League are outbidding clubs who are like battling for Champions League places in Spain for players and stuff like that in the transfer market. So the standard's very high. That just means like anyone can beat anyone and that sort of NRL type thing on their day. City lost to Southampton yesterday, didn't they? So there's one for you. Chelsea lost to West Ham the other day, and like I don't know that there's like a style that pervades in terms of like playing style, but there's definitely styles in terms of like the power and the sort of the money involved in the Premier League, and there's the branding of the Premier League, and those kind of things definitely pervade like top down. Otherwise, it's an individual team kind of thing. I don't know if that's your 5-minute little breakdown, exactly what you're hoping for, but it's the closest I can get to.
Fair dinkum. That is, I'm sure they'll educate a lot of people. It does seem a bit more segmented or compartmentalized compared to the NRL, where it's all fairly like there are more stylistic trends across the league, and it's not necessarily as coach related as football. That was kind of like every rugby league team is going to play a slightly different style based on their coach, but I think the manager is far more influential in the what your team is doing. And I think there's more variety in what Premier League teams are doing and how they play their football, as opposed to how rugby league teams in the NRL are playing rugby league, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, I get what you mean, and I'd suggest that's probably a case of like football has just a lot more influences to it. So you get, for example, like there's one of the things I realized looking at some of the stuff around Liverpool winning is that an English manager has never won the Premier League since it became the Premier League. Obviously, back in the day, it happened basically all the time, but like since the big sort of corporate push of the Premier League in sort of, I think it was 92, 93, something like that. So not quite 30 years, but nearing that. You've had a couple Scottish managers winning, obviously one in particular won a whole bunch of them. A Portuguese fella's won a few, Frenchman's won a couple, etc. Quite a lot of Italians, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly looking at it, most of them with Chelsea, but one of them with Leicester City. So that's like there's that outside influence, whereas in the NRL, it's very Australia-centric, right? There's a lot of cultural stuff coming out of like the way the NRL has grown and developed over the years, the sort of heritage of it, and also just the way things are like, I mean, it's predominantly Australian players. There's a lot of obviously Polynesian and New Zealand influence, probably an increasing English influence as well, just in recent years, but it's still very much like Aussie old boys club in a lot of ways, whereas the Premier League, a lot of those like managers kind of implementing different stylistic things are coming from around the world and bringing different ideas. And just football is a more global sport that's been around for long enough that it's had like a lot of it's sort of like how languages develop, where like civilizations are like pre-technology making everything connected. Civilizations just grew up on their own, developed their own words for things and their own sounds and whatever, their own cultures basically, and then now we can learn all these different languages on an app, but they developed on their own because they were sort of isolated. And you had a lot of football like that, where it's really only the last 30 years, maybe not even, well, yeah, about 30 years, where like players have played sort of irrespective of their countries, and you see this in Premier League lineups. You look at just the nationalities of the teams, right? Whereas back in the 60s, it would have just been all British players, basically, with one or two stragglers from elsewhere. Now it's, especially at the top teams, you've got less of an English and British influence, which is, I mean, that's probably changing at the moment because there have been some restrictions. But anyway, like just the Premier League in particular, more than probably any other league in the world, is very open to outside influences, which is probably why that's like not a cohesive kind of stylistic thing like that, which even still to this day, I would suggest you still see that, I think, in like Germany, very technical, technical fast flowing kind of style. Italy generally would have like strong defenses, very well organized kind of stuff. Spain, a lot of passing and moving, and sort of in keeping with that Guardiola type stuff, but obviously in a different implementation when you're working with players below the standard of Lionel Messi.
We've talked a lot about style, and you've done a lot of Flying Kiwis work. You've published your Flying Kiwis thing here. As always, weekly, wrapping up the Kiwi footballers, men and women, doing their thing around the world. So you've got a lot of international players, Sarpreet Singh, Joe Bell. Who else do we have there? Betsy Hassett doesn't play in the American League, so shout out to her. Elijah Just, Dalton Wilkins, couple of names there that you're busting down. But we've got a pretty hearty core of footballers in America, and I think we've done a pretty damn fine job so far intertwining like the updates on the sport with the style of play. So if you can thread the needle there with the Kiwi footballers in America in the NWSL, what does that stand for? Northern Women's Soccer League?
National Women's Soccer League, close enough.
National Women's Soccer League. I was looking for a Northern America, whatever, blah blah blah. So we've got a bunch of Kiwi footballers in America. Take someone start with Abby Erceg, for example, and if you can take this forward to the whole crew of Kiwi women doing their thing in America. What's happening with her? So Abby Erceg, she plays for North Carolina, one of the best players in the competition, one of the best teams in the competition. Do you see any, how are you assessing Abby Erceg style of football, what she's good at, what she's doing at the moment with regards to the NWSL, which was one of the first competitions to come back after the pandemic? So same NRL vibe there. You've got a post-pandemic restart. What's happening? What are you seeing? How are you feeling about Abby Erceg and then the rest of those Kiwi wahine in the big USA?
Yeah, the NWSL was the first league in America as far as team sports go to come back, and this is a factor in it because they also maybe were a little. They've got a new commissioner. They're very desperate to sort of capitalize on something that's never really happened before for domestic football in America, and that's kind of feeding it to just somehow tap into the immense fandom that their national team has. The women's league doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily flowing on down to the club stuff as well, and part of that is this is just my own theory, but I think that just those national women's players for America haven't always had the best buy-in themselves with some of these clubs. You even see a couple of them aren't playing at the moment. just for, there's some, to be fair, relatively legitimate concerns about like the fact that this whole tournament is going to be played on artificial surface, short turnarounds, etc., etc. There's also a more, not selfish, but like, personal goal orientated, we'll say, target of the Olympics next year and wanting to be fit for that as well and not wanting to risk things when it's already a little bit of a compromised thing. But that's the case with most of these sports leagues. Pretty much all of them that have come back at this point, they're compromised to some level. It's a matter of, do you want to play the sport or not? And Abby Erceg did a bit of media stuff after her previous game, and she basically said this. She's like, they asked her what it's like living in the bubble, and she said, well, it's not ideal, it's not the easiest, but we do what we can to be able to have a season, to be able to do what we do professionally. Like, we want to play football. This is what we're here to do. We'll do what it takes in order to make that possible. And I think that's sort of like, that's probably the stylistic thread with Abby Erceg to look through, is just like what an intense leader she is. Like, her coach tweeted out a photo of her after warm-ups before the previous game, like carrying the water bottles in and saying like, this is a captain, the leader of the team, doesn't have to be the person doing this. There are coaches and reserves and whatever who would have done it otherwise, but just like leading by example in that way. And that's very much how she plays as well. Like there was a moment sort of early on in their most recent game as well, which was against Chicago. And it was 0-0 sort of like 20 minutes in, and one of the other centre back gets dispossessed, and then players running through, and Erceg comes sprinting over to get a challenge and doesn't win the ball, but at least does enough to like disrupt the shot to where it goes straight at the keeper, is saved. Just the big effort kind of things, the leading by example kind of things. And then she's also extremely proficient at popping up with specifically a headed goal off a set piece. I think I saw a stat that it's in the Flying Kiwis actually. She scored, I think, 6 goals in the NWSL so far in her career, and 5 of them have been headers. And this is what she did this week as well. Like at 82nd minute or something, they have a corner kick, they take it short, they cut it back, they cross it in from a deeper angle. She beats the offside trap, heads it in off the crossbar. There's your winning goal. They win 1-0. Player of the Day award for Abby Erceg. She's got many of those already in her career, and just sort of like, it'd be interesting to see what the case would be, since we're talking about hypotheticals before. Like, if she was an American player, if she wasn't a New Zealand international, I think she'd be extremely well celebrated as I don't know if I'd say the best defender in the world, because that's always going to be a subjective thing, but she'd certainly be in that conversation a lot more if she was winning World Cups with America. And her centre-back partner at North Carolina is Abby Dahlkemper, who is a starting centre-back for the USA national team, just won the last World Cup and all this. So there's a lot of, there's a direct parallel to be made there as well. And she just continually leads by example, and does incredible things. Has been like captaining that team to, I think, 2 of the last 3 championships. They also won the one before that when they weren't in North Carolina. They were in Western New York Flash, and their team got bought out and moved. But yeah, like a consistently dominating player in that league, and maybe if she wasn't a New Zealander, would be getting even more credit than she already does. And she is a Defender of the Year winner at a couple years ago in this competition. But that's our gain. It's just showing a New Zealand footballer doing amazing things. There is also another aspect I was mentioning about some of like how they've had to make like semi compromises. Maybe they've rushed this league back in order to be the first team team sport league back. One of the issues they had was that the Orlando Pride team had a outbreak of coronavirus throughout the squad. I think there were like 6 players and 4 staff members or something like that, all tested positive like a week or 2 out from the start of this competition, which meant they didn't have the time to recover, so they had to pull out of the competition, just one fewer team. And Ellie Riley was meant to be playing for them. So Ellie Riley, captain of the Football Ferns, and a really awkward situation for her, because she had a pretty happy home at old Rosengård in Sweden, and then left there to go challenge herself at Chelsea, didn't get the minutes that she hoped for at Chelsea, sort of playing second fiddle there at left back. So she moved to Bayern Munich, and then also found herself in the same situation at Bayern Munich, where she was playing off the bench more often than not, sort of as the alternate player in her position rather than getting those starts. So she moved to America, and her team had to pull out of the league because they had a bit of a Pando episode. And now she's left Orlando Pride, having announced she's going back to Sweden, which I think is probably where she'll end up living after her partner's from Sweden. And she doesn't specify whether she's going to a club or not. It sounds like it might just be she's just going because she's not going to be playing football in America for this season, so might as well just go be with family and whatever. So 1/quarter fewer New Zealanders in the NWSL now because of that, which is unfortunate, but so it goes. Maybe she'll be back at some point in the future, because there were a lot of good vibes about her, because she was, born in America, raised in America, went to college in America. She has a Kiwi father, I think, but she's very much like she's very much of American as well, as one of these complicated modern world things where you can obviously, being from one country doesn't mean you can't have a deep, powerful, meaningful connection to another. She's actually, I can't remember where it was, but there was an interview she spoke kind of really beautifully about what it means to be like, I don't want to say an adopted Kiwi, but something close to that, through the Football Ferns. And yeah, so it would have been really cool to see her playing in that competition too, but so it goes. There is still Rosie White and Katie Bowen, both of whom have through their first 2 games of this tournament. And it's a tournament where you play 4 games in the round robin, and then because there's only 8 teams now, they just go straight into quarterfinals from that. First 8th, I guess. North Carolina Courage with Abby Erceg, they've won all 3 of their games as of recording. So they're cruising towards their first seed, which is just what they do every season. Utah, I think they drew 1 and they won 1. So they're also hosting it. It's being played in Utah. So they've got a little bit of pressure on them, even without the fans in attendance. Yeah, Katie Bowen started the first game, played sort of an hour or so as a right wing back / right midfielder sort of role. And then played the same role in the second game, coming off the bench though. So I think at halftime, I think she got quite a few minutes, regardless of having to be off the bench. She still got quite a few minutes in that game. So there's that. There's also Rosie White at the OL Reign, formerly known as the Seattle Reign, but they got bought by Olympique Lyon, the French powerhouse club. They're basically the strongest team, have been for the last decade, strongest women's football club team on the planet. And they're doing the Manchester City thing of buying clubs in other leagues around the world. So I don't know what the ethics of that are, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. Rosie White played off the bench in one of their games as they struggled to a 0-0 draw. She was chucked on near the end, bring a bit of energy. Couldn't quite score that winning goal, though, as she actually did a couple times last season. Popped up with crucial goals and 1-0 wins. And then she started the second game in a more advanced midfield role, went off semi-injured with about half an hour to go. Ice pack strapped to her leg afterwards. Hopefully nothing too bad. That'll keep her out of future games. She went down injured, got some treatment, got back up, went back on to carry on the game, but then got subbed off in a triple sub straight after. So maybe a little precautionary there. She was going to carry on. And the Reign drew their first game, and I think they lost their second game, so they're a little lower down the old seedings. But it's a bit similar to the Kiwi NBL, where it doesn't really matter where you finish as long as you don't finish 8th, because you finish 8th, you'll play North Carolina in the quarterfinals. But everyone does make the playoffs, so everyone gets that sort of backup line. But definitely, as far as some of these footy leagues around the world go, the American women's stuff is pretty hot property for some top flying Kiwis action, and has been for a couple years. And Abby Erceg continually leading the way as she does in most aspects with that. And give them a big old focus. And it's also quite interesting because Rosie White did some media stuff as well after her previous game, or maybe before, I forget which, but same as Abby Erceg, both of them got asked that question about the World Cup hosting coming down here, and I think that's both of them also had the same answer, which was just what a boost it's going to be to the sport in New Zealand, and this is part of that, is like following that path and seeing how like the because you don't just turn up to a World Cup and hope to do well because you're hosting. You got to put a bit of resource into it, beforehand, and make sure everyone's chugging along at building towards that kind of peak performance at that host thing when the spotlight is on. And there is a good core. I was thinking about this with the Ferns. They've had a few retirements in recent years, but there is a very strong core. The majority of that team from the World Cup last year, not too many more of them are going to be retiring before 2023. So there is a strong sort of unit of a team there building towards that World Cup. Rosie White will definitely be amongst it. Hopefully Abby Erceg will be in amongst it. She said she wants to. It's just a matter of like fitness and being, body holding up through the years, whatever. 3 more years is hard to predict, but she's not like, she's only about 30 now. She's one of the fittest players in the team, so I don't think that'll be an issue. But yeah, also just that is gonna be for the next 3 years. It's gonna be we put a nice little spotlight right here on some of the Kiwi players playing, the Kiwi women playing in America, and that is gonna be a spotlight for all Kiwi female footballers over the next few years, is like building towards that World Cup and how that whole thing's gonna shake out too.